So let's have a little look at thumb locks or push locks. They're called all sorts of different things, but I've always called them thumb locks. They come in lots of different sizes, lots of different colours, lots of different designs. This one is quite a large one. And you can see that it locks together like that, nice and shiny. Needs to be a relatively big bag to actually accommodate that because it is quite a big, chunky beast of a lock. And this one, a little bit more delicate. Same sort of idea though. And this one is a wee one, which is ideal for purses or wallets or anything like that. But you can put whichever one you want on whichever size bag you want. Now they come, let's just use the big one as an example. You'll usually have the push lock, the thumb lock bit, and this has an area that pushes in and out and it's sprung inside. And a back plate of some sort. Now be careful when you try and fit these that you get the back plate the way you need it. I have been known, and I've done it once or twice, to fit the back plate that way and then realise that that's actually not the way it goes. It doesn't actually sit that way. It works, but it doesn't actually, that's not the way it's meant to go. That's the way it's meant to go. I'm not sure it makes a lot of difference, but it's just sometimes if you fit the back plate upside down, this bit won't fit at all. So do be careful. So you'll have the thumb lock part and the back plate. You will usually have one of these sort of ladder type washers to go on the back, and often a couple of those little tiddly widdly grub screws, depending on how these things fit. So there are cheaper versions that have sort of prongs that poke through, and I haven't got one to show you, so I can't actually show you how those work, but they are cheaper and they're a bit iffy in my opinion. Now the first thing I will say is that there is a huge difference between this little one and this big one, and you can probably see what the difference is there. This one here has a much smaller gap than this one here. So what I like to do if I'm actually going to use a big one, and this is in particular with a big one, is take a piece of the foam or whatever stabiliser I'm using for my bag, whatever the pattern suggests, wrap a bit of fabric around it to indicate my exterior fabric and my lining fabric. Or if I were using faux leather, I'd actually join two pieces together and make a sort of small sample and just test how thick that is. I'm going to slot the edge of my foam and my fabric into there. Now, I think you can see that actually fits, but it won't once the bag's made, because the edge of my bag will be top stitched, which will take away some of the thickness. This bit's been top stitched, and you can see there, that's really loose. It's actually quite baggy in there. So if you're going to use a big thick one like this, and I've only got headliner in here, you would need something much thicker in there, or you'd need to pack out that area on the edge of your flap that you were putting your thumb lock onto. You need that thumb lock to sit nicely in there, otherwise you're going to get a gape, and it's just not attractive. Just not attractive. So for the big one, you sometimes need to pack out inside of your flap before you do your top stitching, just to make sure you've got enough bulk. And do it on the inside, so do it on the lining side. So go into your flap and just add some extra thickness there. It might be a little bit of fusible fleece or a couple of layers of cotton fabric, just something to give so that the thumb lock sits nice and securely without being a huge amount of a gap between the front and the back. That's what you don't want. So how do we fit it? Let's have a little look at this one. We'll use this one. And I'm not going to bend the prongs because I don't want to waste the hardware that I've got. So let's imagine this is my bag and this is my flap. Let me just get these bits out of the way. So this is my, let's say it's a purse. This is my bag. This is the front part of my bag or my purse, and this is my flap. Now usually I would fit my flap part actually when I'm making the flap. So I'm going to show you how I would do that. And these generally just slide onto the side of the flap, which is why you need them to be fitting really nicely, because you just don't want them flitting around. Now, ideally you would mark the centre of your flap, and then you would place your piece of hardware where you need it. And you'd need to be guided by the markings in your pattern as to where it needs to sit. And then you would get one of your little tiny grub screws. Ideally you'd have, whoops, a magnetic screwdriver, which I don't appear to have. And you would put one of your grub screws into one of those little tiny holes. In fact, I think my problem is that screwdriver is actually too big. Let's find a slightly smaller one. So these little micro screwdrivers that you can pick up at the DIY store are super duper for this. So I've got my little grub screw. I haven't made a hole for it. These are self-tapping, so they'll tap straight into the fabric. Now I haven't tightened it right up because I always like to double check that I've got it in exactly the right place before I fully tighten it. Make sure that you've got your screwdriver and your screw at 90 degrees to your fabric, because otherwise you'll find that you'll cross thread the hardware. So I haven't marked the centre, so I don't know if that's properly centred, but it doesn't look far off, does it? So now I'm happy with the positioning. I'm just going to tighten up those screws, and that is beautifully secure on my flap. So I'm going to move my flap out of the way. Now, you need to remember which way your plate goes with your flap, so that way is the right way. And in the same way as we have done with other hardware, make sure that the prongs on the back are at 90 degrees to this base plate. Often when they come, they're pushed in a little bit, and you need them to be out. Now, these back plate washers come, they're fairly generic. They come with every bit of hardware, and some are big and some are small. But they're not necessarily made to fit the hardware. So you can see here that actually those prongs fit through the first hole and the 1, 2, 3, 4 and the 5th hole, but not the 6th one. So if I were to make a cut in my fabric at the 1st and the 6th hole, it would be too wide. So the 1st and the 5th hole. So let's mark. Now I'm going to mark where I want it to go. That would be where I'd marked from my pattern piece, and I know that I'm going to use my 1st and my 5th hole. So the 2nd hole here, sorry, the 3rd hole here is my central hole, and I'm going to do exactly as we would with a magnetic fastener, and I'm going to make a mark through the 2 holes either side of my central mark. I'm going to cut through. Now this would be just your exterior fabric. You wouldn't actually do this on a piece that's been top stitched. So when you go through to the back, you wouldn't be going through the lining fabric. You would only be going through, in fact I'm going to pull that lining fabric out. You would only be going through your exterior fabric and your foam, if you have foam. If you don't, you have Decovil. Again, if you have Decovil or something like that, then put an extra little bit of stabiliser, because this is going to take a bit of pulling. It's going to be tugged and pulled. So put a little bit of extra stabiliser on your fabric just behind it to make sure that it stays really nice and secure. Now, I'm not going to fold these prongs out because I don't want to waste this piece of hardware. I'm going to put it back in the bag and store it again. But I would push my prongs out towards the outside. I would sometimes, depending on if I've got foam in here, I would add a little bit of extra sort of faux leather. Just cut the holes in and put it on the back to stabilise in exactly the same way as I do when I do magnetic fasteners. So you would push your prongs outwards and then put a piece of duct tape over the top of the prongs to stop those prongs rubbing on the exterior, on the lining fabric when you have created your bag. So we've now fitted both parts, and our flap part fits perfectly into the back plate part. They're really easy to fit. There's a mistake to think that you need to make lots of holes in your fabric. You don't, because those little grub screws are self-tapping. Now, often they're absolute swine if you lose them. If they go on the floor, you'll be lucky if you ever find them again. So I do occasionally go, I know local B&Q or some electrical stores online sell grub screws, and that's what these are called online. So I've got bags and bags of grub screws in 1mm, 2mm, 3mm, and I can usually find one that will work if I've lost one, and I do occasionally lose them. And there was a time when I used to chase them around the floor looking for them, and now I just don't. I'm like, no, that's gone. If it wants to escape, it made a bid for freedom, it can have its freedom. So that's a very simple thumb lock, and that's how you fit it. The exact same process works for this one and this one. The only difference is that the gap at the top of the thumb lock part is much wider on the bigger one, so you will need to pack out your flap before you do any top stitching. Ideally you want to pack it out and then top stitch over it, but the easiest way to do it is to test on a spare bit of fabric first. And what you want is for it to, ideally, is not to, let me just take that off because the weight will actually fall off, but is for it to sit on there, and you should be able to turn it up that way without it falling off. Now, if that were top stitched, that wouldn't be the case. You want that to kind of hold on to the edge of your flap. But keep in mind that if this is top stitched, it's going to squish that edge down, and then it's going to fall off. And a lot of people get confused by that because you think, oh, that's working. Yep, that's okay. But then you top stitch it, it flattens down the edge and it just falls off. Always try a tester. Doesn't hurt to do a tester on a scrap, does it?